Marcus Rivera pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway of the mathematics building at Thornfield University. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished floor. It was 7:30 in the evening, and most of the students had already gone home. The building was quiet now except for the hum of the fluorescent lights above his head. He wore a gray uniform with his name stitched on the pocket. His hands were rough from years of cleaning work. At 42 years old, Marcus had been working as a janitor at the university for 3 years. Before that, he had cleaned office buildings, restaurants, and shopping malls. It was honest work, but it was hard on his back and knees. As Marcus walked past groups of students, none of them looked at him. They were too busy talking about their classes, their parties, and their weekend plans. To them, Marcus was just part of the furniture. He was the man who emptied their trash and cleaned their messes. They did not see him as a real person with dreams and thoughts of his own. Marcus did not mind too much. He had learned long ago that this was how the world worked. People who cleaned buildings and served food were invisible to most others. Sometimes a professor would nod at him politely. Sometimes a student would say thank you when he held a door open. But mostly, people looked right through him as if he was not there at all. He pushed his cart into the first classroom and began his routine. He emptied the small trash can near the door. He picked up papers that students had dropped on the floor. He wiped down the desks with a damp cloth. Then he turned to face the large chalkboards that covered the front wall of the room. The boards were covered with numbers and symbols. Marcus stopped his work and stared at them. His eyes moved slowly across the equations, following the logic from one line to the next. He saw derivative notations, integration symbols, and complex fractions. Most people would see only meaningless scribbles, but Marcus saw something beautiful. This was his secret. This was the part of his day that he loved most. Every evening after the students left, Marcus would stand in front of the chalkboards and read what the professors had written. He would study the math problems and try to understand how they were solved. Nobody knew that he did this. Nobody would believe it if they were told. Marcus had not finished high school. When he was 16 years old, his mother became very sick. She had cancer and the medical bills were enormous. His father had left them years before, so Marcus was the only one who could help. He dropped out of school and took whatever jobs he could find. He worked in fast food restaurants, gas stations, and construction sites. He sent every dollar he could to help pay for his mother's treatment. His mother survived, and Marcus was grateful for that. But by the time she was well again, years had passed. Marcus was 19, and all his friends had graduated and moved on with their lives. He thought about going back to school, but he needed to keep working. There were always bills to pay, rent to cover, and food to buy. The dream of education seemed far away, like something that belonged to other people. But Marcus never stopped being curious. When he was 25, he found a basic math textbook in a library donation bin. He took it home and started reading. At first, the concepts were difficult. He had to read some pages 5 or 6 times before he understood them. But slowly, things began to make sense. He discovered that he loved mathematics. He loved how logical it was, how one truth led to another, building like blocks into towers of understanding. Over the years, Marcus collected more books. He found them in thrift stores, library sales, and sometimes in the dumpsters behind the university bookstore. Students threw away perfectly good textbooks at the end of each semester, and Marcus rescued them. He now had a small collection in his tiny apartment. Books on algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and calculus lined a shelf he had built himself. At night, after his shift ended at midnight, Marcus would go home and study. He would make himself a cup of coffee and sit at his small kitchen table with his books spread out before him. He worked through problems, checking his answers against the solutions in the back of the book. When he got stuck, he would think about it for days until the solution finally clicked in his mind. Marcus knew he would never be a real mathematician. He did not have a degree. He had not gone to college. He was just a janitor who liked numbers, but that did not stop him from learning. Math was free. Anyone could think about it. Anyone could explore its mysteries. In the privacy of his own mind, Marcus could be a mathematician, even if the world would never recognize him as one. As he stood in the classroom, Marcus finished reading the equations on the board. They were from an advanced calculus class. He recognized the professor's handwriting. Dr. Elena Hartwell taught this class. She was famous at the university for being brilliant but demanding. Students often complained that her tests were too hard. Marcus had been following her lectures by reading the boards she left behind. Over the past few months, he had learned about limits, derivatives, and integrals. He listened sometimes too, standing quietly in the hallway while she taught. He would pretend to be fixing a door or replacing a light bulb, but really he was absorbing every word she said. Tonight's lesson had been about the chain rule and integration by substitution. Marcus understood it. He had studied these concepts in one of his textbooks. He smiled slightly as he picked up the eraser and began to clean the boards. He wiped away the numbers carefully, almost sadly. Each evening, he erased knowledge that students had paid thousands of dollars to receive. He erased it for free, but he had already memorized it. Marcus moved to the next classroom. This one was smaller and smelled like coffee. Someone had spilled a drink near the back row. He got his mop and cleaned it up. Then he looked at the chalkboard. This was a different class, something about linear algebra. Marcus did not know much about this topic yet, but he was curious. He made a mental note to look for a book about it. The evening continued like this. Marcus moved from room to room, cleaning and learning. He found scratch paper in the recycling bins and sometimes saved it. Students often worked out problems on loose sheets and then threw them away. Marcus would take these papers home and study the work, seeing where students made mistakes and how they solved difficult problems. By 9 o'clock, Marcus had cleaned most of the classrooms. The building was almost completely empty now. Even the few graduate students who usually stayed late had gone home. Marcus liked this time of night. The building felt like it belonged to him. He could move freely, think clearly, and imagine that he was a student here too. He passed by Professor Hartwell's office. The light was still on. Marcus could see her through the small window in the door. She was sitting at her desk surrounded by stacks of papers. She looked tired. Marcus wondered what it was like to spend your whole day thinking about mathematics, to get paid for doing what you loved. It seemed like a dream to him. Marcus pushed his cart toward the last classroom of the night. It was the big lecture hall where Professor Hartwell taught her most advanced class. This was always the last room he cleaned. He opened the door and stepped inside. The room could hold 100 students. Tonight it was silent and dark except for the lights Marcus turned on. He walked to the front of the room and looked up at the massive chalkboards. They were covered with equations from today's lesson. But these equations looked different. They were more complex, more challenging. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies and stepped closer. He began to read, his mind engaging with the mathematical puzzle before him. For a few precious minutes, Marcus Rivera was not a janitor. He was simply a man in love with numbers, standing in a room where knowledge lived and breathed. Professor Elena Hartwell stood in front of her advanced calculus class, chalk in hand, ready to present what she called her masterpiece. She had been teaching at Thornfield University for 12 years, and this semester she had her best group of students yet. They were sharp, dedicated, and willing to struggle with difficult concepts. Today she would give them the challenge of the semester. The classroom was full. 30 students sat with their notebooks open, pens ready. Some looked excited. Others looked nervous. They all knew that Professor Hartwell's challenges were never simple. She had a reputation across campus. Other professors said she was too demanding. Students called her the dragon lady behind her back, though the ones who survived her classes later thanked her for pushing them so hard. Elena was 51 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair that she never bothered to dye. She wore simple clothes, usually black pants and a button-up shirt. She did not care about fashion or appearances. She cared about mathematics, about the pure beauty of logic and proof. She had published over 40 research papers and had won awards for her work in theoretical mathematics. But her first love was teaching, watching young minds grasp concepts that once seemed impossible. For the past 3 weeks, Elena had been building toward this moment. Each class had introduced new techniques and concepts. She taught her students about advanced integration methods, complex substitutions, and the relationship between different areas of calculus. Each lesson was a building block, and today she would ask them to build the entire structure. Elena turned to the chalkboard and began to write. The chalk made soft clicking sounds as she formed numbers and symbols. She wrote across the first board, then moved to the second, then the third. The problem grew larger and more complex with each line. Students copied furiously into their notebooks, their eyes widening as they realized the scope of what she was asking. The problem combined multiple calculus concepts in a single proof. It required understanding of limits, derivatives, integrals, and the fundamental theorem of calculus. But more than that, it required creative thinking. There was no simple formula to apply. Students would need to see connections that were not obvious, to make leaps of logic that required true understanding rather than memorization. When Elena finished writing, she stepped back and looked at her work. 3 chalkboards filled with mathematical notation. It was beautiful to her, like a poem or a painting. She turned to face her students. "This," she said, gesturing at the boards, "is what I want you to solve. You have 1 week. You may work together. You may use any resources you like. But I want to see your own thinking, your own logical steps. Do not just copy answers from the internet. I will know." A student in the front row raised his hand. His name was Jason, and he was one of her strongest students. "Professor Hartwell, is this even solvable?" Elena smiled. "Of course it is solvable. I solved it myself before I wrote it on the board. The question is whether you can solve it." Another student spoke up. "Can you give us a hint about where to start?" "Look at what you already know," Elena said. "Every tool you need to solve this problem I have already taught you. The challenge is recognizing which tools to use and when to use them. That is what mathematics is really about, not memorizing formulas but understanding concepts deeply enough to apply them in new situations." The class ended at 4 o'clock. Students packed their bags slowly, still staring at the chalkboards. Some took photographs with their phones. Others copied the problem again, making sure they had written it down correctly. They left the classroom talking in low voices, already forming study groups and planning their approach. Elena gathered her own materials. She had a meeting with the department head in 20 minutes, then office hours after that. It would be a long evening. As she left the classroom, she glanced back at the chalkboards one more time. She decided to leave the problem up. Tomorrow's class was in a different room, so there was no need to erase it. Maybe seeing it on the board would inspire her students to think about it more. The next few days were busy for Elena. She taught her other classes, met with graduate students, worked on her research, and reviewed papers for academic journals. She also received many emails from students in her advanced class. They had questions about the problem. Some had tried one approach and hit a dead end. Others were not sure if they were even starting correctly. Elena answered each email carefully. She did not give away the solution, but she offered guidance. She reminded students about specific theorems they had learned. She suggested they look back at their notes from previous weeks. She encouraged them to keep trying, to not give up when they got stuck. Great mathematics, she told them, required persistence. By Tuesday evening, Elena was exhausted. She had been on campus since 7 that morning. Her office was a mess of papers, books, and empty coffee cups. She looked at the clock. It was almost 8. She should go home, make herself dinner, and get some rest. Tomorrow was another full day. She began packing her briefcase. She put in the papers she needed to grade, her laptop, and a book she was reading about number theory. Then she remembered that she had left her laptop charger in the big lecture hall 3 days ago. She had plugged it in during her class and forgotten to take it with her. Elena sighed. The lecture hall was on the other side of the building. She was tired and her feet hurt. But she needed that charger. She could not work at home without it. She picked up her briefcase and left her office, locking the door behind her. The building was very quiet now. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway. She passed classroom after classroom, all dark and empty. She saw the janitor's cart near the bathroom. The janitor was probably cleaning that area right now. Elena barely noticed these things. Her mind was already at home, thinking about the hot bath she would take and the frozen dinner she would heat up. She reached the lecture hall and pushed open the heavy door. The lights were on inside, which surprised her. Usually the janitor turned them off after cleaning. Maybe he had not reached this room yet. Elena walked down the aisle between the rows of seats, heading toward the front where she had left her charger. Then she stopped. She stood completely still, her briefcase slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a soft thud. Her mouth opened slightly in shock. She could not believe what she was seeing. A man stood at the chalkboard. He wore a gray janitor's uniform. In his hand was a piece of chalk. And on the chalkboard, beneath the problem she had written 3 days ago, were lines of mathematical work. New equations, new steps. The solution was taking shape. Elena's heart pounded. She watched as the janitor continued to write. He did not hear her come in. He was completely focused on the mathematics. His hand moved confidently, forming symbols and numbers. He wrote an integration step, then simplified it. He substituted variables, then transformed the equation into a new form. Elena recognized good mathematical thinking when she saw it. This was not guessing. This was not luck. The janitor understood what he was doing. Each step followed logically from the previous one. He was using techniques that Elena had taught her advanced students. Techniques that required deep understanding of calculus. The janitor stepped back from the board, studying his work. He seemed to be checking his logic, looking for mistakes. Then he nodded to himself and continued. He worked through another section of the problem, his rough hands moving the chalk with surprising grace. Elena could not move. She could not speak. Her mind was racing. Who was this man? How did he know calculus? Why was he solving her problem? She looked at the name on his uniform. Marcos Rivera. She had seen him before, of course. He had cleaned her office, emptied her trash, mopped the floors outside her classroom. But she had never really looked at him. He was just the janitor, except he was not just anything. He was standing at her chalkboard, solving a problem that had stumped 30 of her best students. He was doing mathematics that required years of study and practice. He was demonstrating an understanding that most people never achieved, even with college degrees. Marcus worked for several more minutes. Elena watched every move. She saw him make a small error, catch it himself, and correct it. She saw him pause, thinking deeply about the next step. She saw the moment when something clicked in his mind and he knew how to proceed. These were things she had seen in her best graduate students, in researchers at mathematics conferences, in brilliant minds dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. Finally, Marcus reached the last section of the problem. Elena held her breath. This was the hardest part, the section that required the most insight. She watched as Marcus wrote carefully, checking each step. He filled the remaining space on the third chalkboard. Then he set down the chalk and looked at his work. Elena could see it from where she stood. The solution was complete. It was correct. Marcus Rivera, the janitor, had solved her impossible problem. He had done it alone with no help, no resources except his own mind and whatever knowledge he had somehow acquired. For a long moment, Marcus just stared at the boards. Elena saw something on his face that broke her heart. It was a look of pure joy mixed with deep sadness. Joy at the beauty of the mathematics, sadness at the life he might have lived if circumstances had been different. Elena knew she had to say something. She had to speak. But what could she say? How could she explain the shock she felt? The shame at her own blindness, the wonder at what she was witnessing. She opened her mouth and one word came out, barely more than a whisper. How? Marcus heard the voice and his entire body went cold. The chalk fell from his fingers and clattered on the floor. He spun around so fast that he almost lost his balance. Professor Hartwell stood in the middle of the lecture hall staring at him. Her briefcase was on the floor beside her. Her face showed complete shock. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. His mind raced with panic. He had been caught. He had touched the chalkboard. He had used the professor's materials. He had probably broken some university rule. He was going to lose his job. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quickly. His voice was shaking. "I'm so sorry, Professor. I should not have touched the board. I will clean it right now. I will erase everything. Please, I am sorry." He bent down to pick up the chalk, but his hands were trembling so badly that he dropped it again. He could feel sweat forming on his forehead. He needed this job. He had rent to pay, bills due, responsibilities. If he got fired, what would he do? Jobs were hard to find. He was 42 years old with no high school diploma. Who else would hire him? But Professor Hartwell was not looking at Marcus. She was looking at the chalkboard. She walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes fixed on the mathematical work he had done. She came to the front of the room and stood just a few feet away from him. Marcus pressed himself back against the board, wishing he could disappear. Elena studied the equations carefully. She read each line, following the logic from beginning to end. Her finger traced the air in front of the board, moving along with the mathematical steps. Marcus watched her face, trying to read her expression. Was she angry, confused? He could not tell. Finally, she spoke again. "This is correct. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Every step is correct, and you found a more efficient path than I expected. You substituted here instead of waiting until later. That is very clever. Marcus did not know what to say. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? He stayed silent, barely breathing. Professor Hartwell turned to look at him. Her eyes met his for the first time ever. Really met his. Like he was a real person, not just a janitor who cleaned her office. Where did you learn to do this? She asked. I taught myself, Marcus said. His voice was so quiet she could barely hear him. I found books. Old textbooks that students threw away. I have been reading them at night. I am sorry, Professor. I know I should not have used your classroom. I should not have touched your problem. I will leave now. He started to move toward his cleaning cart, but Elena held up her hand. Wait, she said. Do not leave yet. I want to understand this. You taught yourself calculus? From textbooks you found in the trash? Marcus nodded. He still looked terrified, like a trapped animal. Yes, ma'am. I have been studying for about 2 years. Maybe a little more. I listen sometimes, too, when professors teach. I stand in the hallway and I hear the lessons. I know I am not supposed to, but I cannot help it. Mathematics is interesting to me. Elena felt something break open inside her chest. She thought about all the advantages she had in her life. She had gone to good schools. Her parents had paid for her education. She had never worried about food or rent while she studied. She had been encouraged, supported, given every opportunity to develop her talents. And here was this man who cleaned toilets and emptied trash, who had somehow found his way to advanced calculus through sheer determination and discarded books. How much do you know? Elena asked. What topics have you studied? Marcus relaxed just a little. The professor did not seem angry anymore. She seemed curious. I started with basic algebra, he said, then geometry and trigonometry. I moved to calculus about 8 months ago. I have been working through a textbook on single variable calculus. I am not very fast because I have to work, but I try to study every night. And you understood this problem? Elena gestured at the board. You followed my lectures for the past 3 weeks? Yes, ma'am. I read the boards after class. I thought about what you wrote. Some nights I went home and studied the concepts more until I understood them. When you gave this big problem, I wanted to try solving it. I know it was not for me. I know I am not a student here. But I thought maybe, just this once, I could pretend. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them back. She was not a person who cried easily, but this moment was overwhelming. She had spent 12 years teaching at this university. She had taught hundreds of students. Many of them came from wealthy families. They had private tutors, expensive calculators, all the resources money could buy. Some of them still failed her class because they did not care enough to work hard. And here was Marcus Rivera, who had nothing except determination and a few old books, solving problems that challenged her best students. Why did you drop out of high school? Elena asked gently. Marcus looked down at his feet. My mother was sick, cancer, we had no insurance. I needed to work to help pay the bills. My father left us when I was young, so it was just me and her. I could not let her die because we had no money. Is she okay now? Yes, she survived. She lives in Florida now with my aunt. But by the time she got better, I was too old to go back to school. I had to keep working. There were always bills to pay. I thought about getting my GED, but I never had time. I work 6 days a week. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she made a decision. Marcus, I want you to meet me tomorrow. In my office. Can you come at 9 in the morning before your shift starts? Marcus looked worried again. Am I in trouble, Professor? No, Elena said firmly. You are not in trouble. I promise you that. I want to talk to you about something important. Will you come? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. I will come. Good. And Marcus, do not erase this board. Elena pointed at his solution. Leave it exactly as it is. I want to show someone. Marcus was confused, but he agreed. Professor Hartwell picked up her briefcase and found her laptop charger where she had left it. She looked at Marcus one more time. You have a gift, she said. A real gift. I have taught mathematics for many years, and I know talent when I see it. Tomorrow we will talk about what to do with that gift. She left the classroom and Marcus stood alone in the silence. He looked at the chalkboard, at the equations he had written. His hands had stopped shaking, but his mind was spinning. What did the professor want? What would happen tomorrow? He did not know, but for the first time in a very long time, Marcus felt something like hope. He returned to his cleaning cart and finished his work for the night. But everything felt different now. Someone had seen him. Really seen him. Professor Elena Hartwell, one of the most respected mathematicians at the university, had looked at his work and called it correct. She had called it clever. She had said he had a gift. Marcus cleaned the rest of the building in a daze. He mopped floors and emptied trash cans, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the expression on Professor Hartwell's face when she saw the solution. She had been shocked, yes, but also impressed. Maybe even excited. When his shift ended at midnight, Marcus went home to his small apartment. It was just one room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom. The furniture was old and worn, but on one wall he had built a bookshelf and it was filled with his treasured textbooks. He looked at them now with different eyes. For 2 years he had studied alone, thinking that nobody would ever know or care. He had solved problems in secret like a guilty pleasure. He had never imagined that anyone would see his work, much less appreciate it. Mathematics had been his private world, a place where he could be smart and capable, even if the rest of the world saw him as just a janitor. But now Professor Hartwell knew. She had seen what he could do, and she wanted to meet with him tomorrow. Marcus did not let himself hope for too much. He had learned long ago that life did not give many second chances to people like him. But still, as he lay in bed that night, he felt something stirring in his chest. It felt like possibility. In her own home across the city, Elena Hartwell sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. She could not stop thinking about what she had witnessed. The image of Marcus at the chalkboard kept replaying in her mind. His confident movements, his careful logic, his obvious love for mathematics. She thought about all the times she had walked past Marcus in the hallways. She had never spoken to him beyond a polite nod. She had never wondered about his life, his thoughts, his dreams. To her, he had been invisible, just part of the background of university life. Elena felt ashamed. She prided herself on being observant, on seeing potential in her students. But she had completely missed the brilliant mind that had been cleaning her classroom every night. What did that say about her? What did it say about the university, about society, about the way people judged each other based on jobs and appearances? She opened her laptop and began typing an email. It was addressed to the dean of the mathematics department. She explained what she had discovered, describing Marcus's solution in detail. She recommended an immediate meeting to discuss options. This was not something she could handle alone. If they were going to help Marcus, they would need institutional support. Elena sent the email, then sat back in her chair. She did not know what would happen next. The university had rules, procedures, bureaucracy. Helping Marcus would not be simple, but Elena was determined to try. She had spent her career teaching mathematics to privileged students who often took their opportunities for granted. Now she had a chance to help someone who truly deserved it, someone who loved mathematics not because it would get him a good job or impress his parents, but because he genuinely found it beautiful. That kind of passion was rare. Elena was not going to let it go to waste. Marcus arrived at Professor Hartwell's office at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. He had barely slept. All night he had worried about this meeting. He wore his cleanest jeans and a button-up shirt he saved for special occasions. His hands were scrubbed clean, but they still looked rough and worn from years of hard work. The mathematics building looked different in the morning. Sunlight came through the windows. Students walked the hallways carrying coffee cups and backpacks. They moved around Marcus like water flowing around a rock. None of them looked at him. He was used to this, but today it bothered him more than usual. He found Professor Hartwell's office and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," she called. Marcus opened the door and stepped inside. The office was small but filled with books. They covered every wall from floor to ceiling. Papers were stacked on the desk. A chalkboard hung on one wall covered with equations. Professor Hartwell stood up and smiled at him. "Marcus, thank you for coming. Please sit down." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Marcus sat carefully, his back straight, his hands folded in his lap. He felt like a child called to the principal's office. "Would you like some coffee?" Elena asked. "I just made a fresh pot." "No, thank you, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. Elena poured herself a cup and sat down at her desk. She looked at Marcus for a long moment. He stared back, trying not to show how nervous he felt. Finally, she spoke. Marcus, I want to start by apologizing to you. Marcus looked confused. Apologizing? For what, Professor? For not seeing you, Elena said. You have been working in this building for 3 years. You have cleaned my office, my classroom, and I never once really looked at you. I never wondered who you were or what you might be capable of. That was wrong of me. Marcus did not know what to say. Nobody had ever apologized to him for anything like this before. It is okay, Professor. I am just a janitor. People do not usually notice people like me. That is exactly the problem, Elena said. People should notice. Everyone deserves to be seen, especially someone with your talent. She paused. I sent an email to the dean last night. I told him what I saw. What you did? He wants to meet with you. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The dean? Why? Because we want to help you, Elena said. Marcus, you should not be cleaning floors. You should be studying mathematics. You should be in a classroom as a student, not pushing a mop as a janitor. You have a gift that most people will never have. It would be a waste for you to spend your life cleaning when you could be learning and creating. Marcus shook his head slowly. I appreciate what you are saying, Professor. But I cannot go to college. I do not have a high school diploma. I have no money. I work 6 days a week just to pay my rent and buy food. College is for other people, not for people like me. What if we could change that? Elena leaned forward. The university has programs for adult learners. We have scholarships. Yes, you would need to get your GED first. That is required. But after that, we could help you enroll. We could find funding. It would not be easy, Marcus. You would have to work very hard. But it would be possible. Marcus wanted to believe her. He wanted it so badly that it hurt. But he had learned not to hope for impossible things. Why would the university do this for me? I am nobody. Just a janitor who solved one math problem. You are not nobody, Elena said firmly. And it was not just one problem. Marcus, that problem I gave my class was designed to challenge advanced students who have studied calculus for years. You solved it in a few hours by yourself with no help. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Marcus looked down at his hands. I just like mathematics. It makes sense to me. It is the one thing in my life that has always made sense. There was a knock on the door. Elena stood up. That will be the dean. Are you ready? Marcus was not ready. He did not feel ready at all. But he nodded anyway. Elena opened the door and 2 men walked in. One was older, maybe 60, with white hair and glasses. The other was younger, perhaps 40, wearing a suit. Elena introduced them. Marcus, this is Dean Robert Chen, head of the mathematics department. And this is Daniel Martinez, director of admissions for adult learning programs. Both men shook Marcus's hand. The dean smiled warmly. Marcus, Professor Hartwell has told me about your remarkable work. I went to see it myself this morning. Very impressive. They all sat down, the office suddenly feeling very crowded. Marcus felt overwhelmed by all the attention. These were important people, educated people, people who ran the university, and they were here because of him. Dean Chen spoke first. Marcus, we want to offer you an opportunity. The university has a program for adult learners who show exceptional promise. We provide full scholarships, including tuition, books, and even a living stipend. It is designed for people who did not have the chance to go to college when they were younger, but who have the ability and desire to learn. Marcus listened, his heart beating fast. It sounded too good to be true, Daniel Martinez continued. The first step would be getting your GED. We can help you prepare for that. We have tutors and study programs. Most people take a few months to prepare, but given your mathematical ability, you might be ready sooner. Once you have your GED, you could start taking college courses. You would probably need to do some prerequisite classes to fill in gaps, but Professor Hartwell could help guide your path. What about my job? Marcus asked. I need to work. I have bills to pay. The stipend would cover your basic living expenses, Dean Chen said. It is not a lot of money, but it should be enough for rent and food if you live modestly. You would need to be a full-time student. That would be your job. Marcus felt dizzy. This was everything he had ever dreamed about but never believed could happen. Why, he asked. Why would you do this for me? Dean Chen leaned back in his chair. Marcus, this university has a lot of money. We have buildings and endowments and fancy equipment. But do you know what we do not have enough of? We do not have enough people who truly love learning for its own sake. Most of our students are here because their parents sent them, or because they want a good job. They are not bad students, but Many of them see education as just a box to check. You are different. Professor Hartwell says you study mathematics at midnight after working a 10-hour shift. That is passion. That is what education should be about, Elena added. Also, Marcus, I want to be honest with you. This would not just be charity. Yes, we want to help you, but you would also help us. You would bring a perspective to our classes that other students do not have. You have lived in the real world. You have struggled. You know that education is a privilege, not a right. That attitude would be valuable to share with students who take their opportunities for granted. Marcus sat quietly, trying to process everything. These people were offering him a new life. They were offering him the chance to become what he had always dreamed of being. But accepting would mean giving up the security of his job. It would mean taking a huge risk. What if he failed? What if he could not handle college-level work? What if he was not as smart as they thought he was? I am scared, Marcus said softly. I am 42 years old. I have been out of school for more than 20 years. What if I cannot do it? Professor Hartwell smiled. Marcus, you have been teaching yourself advanced mathematics from thrown-away textbooks while working 6 days a week. If you can do that, you can handle anything we throw at you. I am not worried about your ability. The only question is whether you are willing to try. Marcus thought about his life. He thought about waking up every morning to clean buildings. He thought about going to bed exhausted every night. He thought about the textbooks on his shelf and the hours he spent solving problems that nobody would ever see. He thought about standing in that classroom, chalk in his hand, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. What do I need to do? He asked. The next hour was a blur of paperwork and planning. Daniel Martinez explained the GED process. He gave Marcus study materials and scheduled him for practice tests. Elena offered to tutor him in areas where he needed help. Dean Chen processed the scholarship application right there in the office, bypassing the usual lengthy procedures. By the time Marcus left, he had a folder full of papers, a schedule of appointments, and a head spinning with possibilities. He walked out of the mathematics building in a daze. He was supposed to go to his cleaning shift, but he had asked for the day off. His supervisor had been surprised but agreed. Marcus walked across campus looking at everything with new eyes. Students sat on benches reading. Professors rushed between buildings carrying briefcases. In a few months, Marcus might be one of them. Not a janitor passing through, but a real student. Someone who belonged. But news travels fast in a university. By lunchtime, people were talking. Professor Hartwell had told a few colleagues about Marcus. Those colleagues told others. Students heard from their professors. By the afternoon, the story of the janitor who solved the impossible problem was spreading across campus. Some people were excited. They thought it was inspiring, a feel-good story about hidden talent being discovered. Others were skeptical. They whispered that maybe Marcus had cheated somehow, looked up the answer online, or gotten help. A few professors worried about setting a precedent, letting someone without proper credentials into advanced classes. In the student center, groups of students debated. Did you hear about the janitor? One girl asked her friends. Apparently he is some kind of math genius. I heard he only has a middle school education, her friend replied. How could he possibly handle college-level work? Maybe he is smarter than half the people in our classes, another student said. Just because someone cleans floors does not mean they are stupid. But is it fair? Someone else asked. We all had to do applications, take tests, write essays. He just gets a free ride because he solved one problem. The conversations continued. Some supportive, some doubtful, all curious. Marcus Rivera, who had been invisible for 3 years, was suddenly the most talked-about person on campus. And he did not even know it yet. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting in Professor Hartwell's office. Marcus had officially given notice at his janitorial job, his last day scheduled for the end of the month. In the meantime, he spent his evenings studying for the GED exam while still working his regular shifts. He was exhausted, but he was also more alive than he had felt in years. Daniel Martinez had been right about the GED. The mathematics section was easy for Marcus. He finished it quickly and scored perfectly. The other sections took more work. Reading comprehension was manageable, though some of the essay questions challenged him. Science was interesting but required memorizing facts he had never learned. Social studies was the hardest. Marcus had been too busy working to pay attention to history or government. Elena tutored him 3 evenings a week. They met in her office after her last class. She helped him understand historical concepts and practice writing essays. At first, Marcus was nervous around her. She was a professor and he was a janitor. But Elena treated him like any other student, challenging him when he was wrong and praising him when he improved. One evening, Marcus struggled with an essay about the Civil War. He had read about it, but his writing was stiff and awkward. Elena read his work and frowned. "Marcus, you write mathematics beautifully. You explain complex proofs with perfect clarity. But this essay feels like you are trying too hard to sound smart. Just write like you talk. Explain it to me like I do not know anything about the Civil War." Marcus tried again, and this time his writing flowed better. Elena smiled. "See? You do know how to do this. You just need to trust yourself." But trusting himself was harder than Elena understood. Every day Marcus fought against the voice in his head that said he did not belong here. That voice reminded him he was 42 years old, that he had failed to finish high school, that he was just a janitor pretending to be something more. The whispers on campus did not help. Marcus heard them sometimes when he walked through the mathematics building. Students would stop talking when he passed, then start again once he was gone. He knew they were talking about him. Some looked at him with curiosity. Others seemed annoyed, as if his presence somehow cheapened their own education. One afternoon, Marcus was in the library using a computer to study. He needed to look up information about the American Revolution for his social studies preparation. Two students sat at a nearby table talking in low voices. They did not realize Marcus could hear them. "I still do not understand why they are letting him in," one student said. "My parents paid full tuition for 4 years. I had to do SATs, write application essays, everything. And this guy just gets a free ride because he cleaned the right classroom at the right time? I heard he is not even that smart," the other student replied. "My friend in Professor Hartwell's class says the problem was not that hard. Anyone could have solved it with enough time." Marcus felt his face grow hot. He wanted to stand up and defend himself, but what could he say? They were right about one thing. He had not followed the normal path. He had not earned his place the way they had. Maybe he was getting special treatment because his story was interesting, not because he truly deserved it. He left the library without finishing his research. He walked across campus, his hands shoved in his pockets, his head down. He was thinking about calling Daniel Martinez and saying he had changed his mind, that he was not ready for this. But then he saw Professor Hartwell walking toward him. She waved and smiled. "Marcus, how is the studying going?" "It is fine," Marcus said, though his voice suggested otherwise. Elena studied his face. "Walk with me for a minute." They headed toward a quiet bench under a tree. Once they sat down, Elena turned to face him. "What happened?" Marcus hesitated, then told her about the students in the library. "Maybe they are right, Professor. Maybe I do not deserve this opportunity. Other people worked harder, followed all the rules, and I am just skipping ahead because I got lucky." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke firmly. "Marcus, let me tell you something about those students. Most of them were born into families with money. They went to good schools. They had tutors, test prep classes, college counselors. They had every advantage in the world. And you know what? Many of them still do not appreciate what they have. I teach some of them, and they sleep through class, copy homework, do the bare minimum." She paused. "You taught yourself calculus from books you found in the trash. You studied at midnight after working 10-hour shifts. You did that for years with no promise that anyone would ever notice or care. That is not luck, Marcus. That is dedication. If anyone deserves to be here, it is you." "But I still feel like a fraud," Marcus admitted. "Like any day now, everyone will realize I do not really belong." "That feeling has a name," Elena said. "It is called imposter syndrome. Almost every student feels it at some point, especially students from backgrounds different from their peers. The truth is, you belong here more than most people, not because you are smarter, though you are very smart, but because you love learning. That is what education should be about." Marcus wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her if he was going to keep going. "Thank you, Professor," he said quietly. 2 weeks later, Marcus took the GED exam. He had studied every day, filling in all the gaps in his knowledge. When the test was over, he had to wait 2 weeks for the results. Those were the longest 2 weeks of his life. He had already quit his janitorial job. His last paycheck would come soon, and after that he would be living on the university stipend. He had no backup plan. If he failed the GED, everything fell apart. The results came in the mail on a Tuesday morning. Marcus stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. His hand shook as he pulled out the paper. He read the scores. He had passed. He had passed all sections. His math score was perfect. His other scores were good enough. Marcus sat down on his old couch and cried. He was not ashamed of the tears. They were tears of relief, of joy, of pride. He had done it. Against all odds, he had gotten his high school equivalency diploma. He called Professor Hartwell immediately. "I passed," he said when she answered. "I knew you would," Elena said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Now the real work begins. The university enrolled Marcus for the spring semester, which started in January. That gave him a few months to prepare. Elena created a reading list for him, books that would help him succeed in college. She also arranged for him to sit in on some of her classes in the fall, so he could get used to the classroom environment. The first time Marcus walked into a class as a student, even though he was just observing, felt surreal. He sat in the back row of Professor Hartwell's Introduction to Calculus course. The other students were mostly 18 or 19 years old. They wore expensive clothes and carried laptops. They chatted with each other about parties and sports teams. Marcus felt completely out of place. His clothes were cheap. His notebook was from the dollar store. He was old enough to be the father of most of these students. But when Professor Hartwell started teaching, everything else faded away. The mathematics was beautiful and Marcus understood it. He belonged to this world even if he looked different from everyone else in it. Over the next few months, Marcus attended several classes. He met with advisors who helped him plan his course schedule. He learned how to use the library computer system, how to access online resources, how to write academic emails. These were things that traditional students learned gradually over 4 years. Marcus had to learn everything at once. He also had to learn how to be poor in a different way. As a janitor, he had been working-class poor. He knew how to stretch $1, cook cheap meals, live simply. But as a student, he was surrounded by people who had money. Students complained about their parents only giving them $1,000 a month for spending money. They bought new clothes every week and ate at expensive restaurants. Marcus's stipend was enough for rent and basic food, but nothing extra. He could not join his classmates when they went out for pizza after study sessions. He could not buy the fancy calculator that everyone else had. He wore the same 3 outfits over and over, washing them by hand to save money on laundry. Some students noticed and felt sorry for him. Others thought he was weird. Marcus tried not to care. He was here to learn, not to make friends, but it was lonely sometimes. He was too old to fit in with the young students and too uneducated to relate to the professors. He existed in a strange in-between space. One day in November, Marcus was studying in the mathematics common room. A group of graduate students were working on a difficult problem, arguing about the best approach. Marcus watched them for a while, then quietly suggested a different method. The graduate students looked at him skeptically. One of them, a young man named David, said, "That would not work. You are missing a key step." But Marcus explained his reasoning, and slowly David realized Marcus was right. The solution worked. David looked surprised. "Who are you?" he asked. "Just a student," Marcus said. "No, I have seen you around," David said. "You are the janitor, the one everyone is talking about." Marcus nodded. "I was a janitor. Now I'm a student." David studied him for a moment. "That problem we were working on is graduate level. How did you solve it so quickly?" "I have been studying," Marcus said simply. David sat down next to him. "Can you show me how you thought through it? I want to understand your approach." For the next hour, Marcus and David worked through the problem together. By the end, David was impressed. "You know," he said, "you might be better at this than most of the graduate students here, and you have not even started college yet." Marcus smiled. "I doubt that. I have a lot to learn. We all do," David said. "That is the point." As December arrived, Marcus prepared for his first official semester as a college student. He was nervous but also excited. He had spent months getting ready, filling in gaps, learning the system. Professor Hartwell assured him he was prepared. Daniel Martinez said he had never seen an adult learner work so hard, but Marcus knew the real test was still ahead. He would be taking 4 classes in the spring, including advanced calculus. He would be graded like any other student. No special treatment, no easy passes. He would succeed or fail based on his own merit. On New Year's Eve, Marcus sat in his apartment looking at his textbooks for the spring semester. Other people were out celebrating, going to parties, drinking champagne. Marcus was alone, but he did not mind. He had everything he needed right here. Books, a desk, a quiet space to think. He opened his advanced calculus textbook and started reading the first chapter. The concepts were challenging, but not impossible. He worked through several problems, checking his answers, building his understanding. When he finally looked up, it was after midnight. A new year had begun, and with it, a new chapter of Marcus Rivera's life. 2 years had passed since that evening when Professor Hartwell found Marcus at the chalkboard. Now on a bright May morning, Marcus stood in line with hundreds of other students wearing a black graduation gown and a cap with a gold tassel. He was about to receive his bachelor's degree in mathematics. The journey to this moment had not been easy. Those 2 years had tested Marcus in ways he never imagined. His first semester had been the hardest. He sat in classes with students half his age, feeling lost and out of place. The advanced calculus course he took with Professor Hartwell was challenging, even though he had prepared carefully. Other students formed study groups easily, bonding over shared experiences. Marcus remained on the outside, the older student who nobody quite knew how to talk to. He struggled with his writing classes. Mathematics came naturally to him, but analyzing literature and writing essays about history felt foreign. He spent hours in the writing center, working with tutors to improve his skills. Sometimes he wondered if he had made a mistake, if he should have stayed in his simple life as a janitor. But there were good moments, too. He earned an A in advanced calculus, scoring higher on the final exam than any other student in the class. His professor, a strict woman named Dr. Phillips, publicly praised his work. She said his mathematical intuition was exceptional, that he saw connections other students missed. In his second year, things got easier. Marcus began to find his rhythm. He learned how to manage his time, how to ask for help when he needed it, how to balance multiple demanding courses. He even made a few friends. David, the graduate student he had helped that day in the common room, became his study partner. They met twice a week to work through difficult problems together. Marcus also started helping other students. He joined the mathematics tutoring center, where he worked with freshmen who struggled with basic calculus. Many of them were intimidated by math, convinced they were not smart enough to understand it. Marcus knew that feeling well. He was patient with them, breaking down complex ideas into simple pieces, showing them that anyone could learn mathematics with enough time and effort. One student he tutored was a young woman named Sarah. She was failing calculus and ready to drop out of her engineering program. "I just cannot do this," she told Marcus during their first session. "Math has never made sense to me." Marcus spent an hour with her, going back to basics, finding where her understanding had broken down. By the end of the session, Sarah had solved 3 problems on her own. She looked amazed. "How did you make that so clear?" she asked. "I remember what it is like to feel lost," Marcus said. "When I was teaching myself, I got stuck all the time, but I learned that being confused is just part of learning. The key is not giving up." Sarah passed her calculus class that semester. She came to thank Marcus at the end of the year, telling him he had saved her academic career. Marcus felt proud. He had helped someone the way Professor Hartwell had helped him, but not everyone was supportive. Throughout his 2 years, Marcus faced doubt and skepticism. Some professors questioned whether he deserved his scholarship. During a department meeting that Marcus heard about later, one professor argued that giving special treatment to adult learners set a dangerous precedent. "If we let in everyone with a sob story," the professor said, "we will lower our academic standards." Professor Hartwell defended Marcus fiercely. She showed the department his grades, all A's and B's. She explained how hard he worked, how he never asked for special favors, how he had proven himself through pure merit. "Marcus Rivera is not lowering our standards," she said firmly. "He is raising them by showing what real dedication looks like." Students whispered too. Some thought Marcus was inspiring. Others resented the attention he received. When a local newspaper wrote an article about the janitor who became a scholar, some students complained that the university was using Marcus as a publicity stunt. They said it was not fair that his story got told while thousands of regular students worked hard in obscurity. Marcus heard the whispers and read the comments online. They hurt, but he tried not to let them stop him. He focused on his studies, on learning, on becoming the mathematician he always dreamed of being. Still, there were days when the weight of being a symbol rather than just a person felt overwhelming. The hardest moment came during his final semester. Marcus was taking a graduate-level course in advanced mathematics, pushing himself to see if he could handle doctoral-level work. He was the only undergraduate in the class. The other students were all graduate students, some working on their PhDs. During one class, a graduate student named Thomas made a dismissive comment. "I do not understand why he is even in this class," Thomas said loud enough for everyone to hear. "He barely has 2 years of college. We have been studying for 6-7 years. It is not fair that he gets to skip ahead just because he has a good story." The professor, Dr. Rahman, looked uncomfortable. Marcus felt his face burn with shame. He wanted to leave, to run out of the room and never come back. But then another student, a woman named Jennifer, spoke up. "Thomas, Marcus scored higher than you on the last exam. Maybe instead of complaining, you should study harder." The room went silent. Thomas looked angry but said nothing more. After class, Jennifer walked with Marcus. "Do not let people like Thomas get to you," she said. "He is jealous. You are good at this and he knows it." "I do not belong here," Marcus said quietly. "I am not a real mathematician. I am just a janitor who got lucky." Jennifer stopped walking and turned to face him. "Marcus, I have a bachelor's degree from MIT and a master's from Stanford. My parents are both professors. I have every advantage in the world. And you know what? You understand mathematics better than I do. You see patterns faster. You solve problems more creatively. That is not luck. That is talent. Stop apologizing for it." Marcus finished that graduate course with an A-, the second highest grade in the class. Dr. Rahman encouraged him to apply to graduate school. "You could get a PhD," she said. "You could become a professor yourself. You have the mind for it." Marcus was not sure about that. Graduate school meant more years of study, more time being poor, more pressure to prove himself. But it also meant continuing to do what he loved. He decided to apply to several programs, including Thornfield's own doctoral program in mathematics. Now, standing in line for graduation, Marcus thought about everything that had brought him here. He thought about his mother and the sacrifices they both made. He thought about the discarded textbooks he had studied by lamplight in his small apartment. He thought about that night when Professor Hartwell found him at the chalkboard, the night that changed everything. The graduation ceremony began. One by one, students walked across the stage to receive their diplomas. When Marcus's name was called, he heard loud cheering. He looked into the audience and saw Professor Hartwell standing up, clapping enthusiastically. Next to her were Dean Chen and Daniel Martinez. David and Jennifer were there too, along with several other professors and students he had come to know. His mother had flown in from Florida. She sat in the front row crying happy tears. After years of sacrifice, after all the guilt Marcus had carried for dropping out of high school to help her, she could finally see him succeed. When Marcus waved to her, she blew him a kiss. Marcus walked across the stage and shook hands with the university president. He received his diploma, a simple piece of paper that represented 2 years of incredible hard work. As he walked back to his seat, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt proud of himself. After the ceremony, Marcus was surrounded by people congratulating him. His mother hugged him tightly. "I always knew you were smart," she whispered. "I am so sorry you had to stop school to help me." "Do not apologize, Mama," Marcus said. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. You gave me life. I could give you a few years." Professor Hartwell approached with a smile. "Congratulations, Marcus. You earned this. I could not have done it without you, Professor. You saw something in me when nobody else did." Elena shook her head. "I just opened a door. You walked through it. That took courage." She paused. "I have some news. The graduate school has accepted you into our doctoral program. Full funding, including a teaching assistantship. If you want it, you can start in the fall." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. A PhD. He could become Dr. Marcus Rivera. He could teach, do research, contribute to the field he loved so much. It seemed impossible, like a dream. "I want it," he said. "I want it very much." The celebration continued into the evening. Marcus had dinner with his mother and Professor Hartwell. They talked about the future, about what Marcus would study in graduate school, about the research questions that interested him. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a life where he was not struggling, where he belonged, where his intelligence was recognized and valued. But Marcus did not forget where he came from. That summer, before starting graduate school, he created a program at Thornfield University. He called it Second Chance Scholars. It was designed for university staff who wanted to continue their education. Janitors, food service workers, security guards, anyone who worked at the university could apply for support in getting their GED and eventually attending college. Marcus knew there were probably other people like him, smart people whose circumstances had denied them opportunities. He wanted to help them find their way. He volunteered to tutor anyone who enrolled in the program. He met with them in the evenings, sharing his story, showing them that it was never too late to change your life. The program started small, with just 3 people in the first year. But it grew. Word spread among the staff that there was help available, that education was possible even if you were older, even if you had failed before, even if you felt like you did not belong. Within 3 years, 15 staff members had gotten their GEDs through the program. 5 had enrolled in college classes. One of them was a woman named Maria, who cleaned the science building. She had always loved biology, but had never finished high school because she got pregnant at 16. Through Second Chance Scholars, Maria got her GED and started taking biology classes. She hoped to become a lab technician someday. Professor Hartwell's teaching changed too. Every semester she began her first class by telling the story of Marcus Rivera, not to embarrass him, but to make a point. She would tell her students about finding Marcus at the chalkboard, about her own blindness to his talent, about the assumptions people make based on appearances. "Look at the people around you," she would tell her classes. "Really look at them. The person sitting next to you, the person who cleans this room, the person serving your food in the dining hall. Each of them has a mind, a story, dreams you know nothing about. Brilliance does not announce itself with credentials or expensive clothes. It can be quiet. It can be hidden. Your job as educated people is to learn to see it." Some students rolled their eyes at this speech, but others listened carefully, and sometimes Professor Hartwell saw those students treat the staff with more respect, smile at the janitors, say good morning to the people who served their lunch. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. 4 years after Marcus received his bachelor's degree, he stood at another graduation ceremony. This time, he received his doctoral degree in mathematics. He was now Dr. Marcus Rivera. The kid who dropped out of high school, the man who cleaned toilets for years, was now a mathematician with a PhD. Several universities offered him teaching positions, but Marcus chose to stay at Thornfield. He became an assistant professor in the mathematics department teaching undergraduate courses. He was known as a demanding but caring teacher. He pushed his students hard but also supported them when they struggled. He ran Second Chance Scholars and continued to tutor anyone who needed help. In his office, Marcus kept a simple reminder of his journey. It was a photograph of the chalkboard from that night, the night Professor Hartwell discovered him. The photograph showed his solution to the impossible problem, written in his own hand. Whenever Marcus felt overwhelmed by his responsibilities or doubted himself, he looked at that photograph. It reminded him of how far he had come and what he had overcome. Marcus also kept one of his old textbooks, the first one he had found in a library donation bin all those years ago. Its pages were worn and marked with his notes. Sometimes students would see it on his shelf and ask about it. Marcus would tell them the story, and they would understand that their professor was not just teaching mathematics. He was teaching them about persistence, about courage, about the power of learning to transform a life. The mathematics building at Thornfield University eventually added a new feature. In the main hallway, they installed a glass display case. Inside was the preserved chalkboard from that fateful night, the one showing Marcus's solution. A plaque. Beneath it read, "Genius can appear anywhere in anyone." Our job is to recognize it. Marcus walked past that display every day on his way to teach. Sometimes he paused to look at it, still amazed that this was real, that his life had truly changed so dramatically. Other times he just smiled and kept walking. He had classes to teach, students to help, research to conduct. He was no longer invisible. But more importantly, he had learned to see others the way Professor Hartwell had finally seen him. With open eyes, with respect, with the recognition that every person carries within them infinite possibility. That was the real lesson, the one Marcus now spent his life teaching. Not just mathematics, but humanity. Not just logic, but love. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. And every evening, when Marcus locked his office and walked through the mathematics building, he sometimes saw the night janitor pushing his cart through the hallways. Marcus always stopped to talk with him, to ask about his day, to see him as a person. Because Marcus knew better than anyone that you never know who might be standing in front of you. You never know what dreams might be hidden in the heart of someone the world has decided to overlook. The chalkboard that changed Marcus's life hung in its glass case, a permanent reminder of what is possible when someone takes the time to truly see another person. When someone says not, "You are just a janitor," but "You are a mathematician." When someone opens a door and believes that the person standing before them has every right to walk through it. That was the gift Professor Elena Hartwell gave to Marcus Rivera. And it was the gift Marcus now gave to everyone he met. The gift of being seen, of being recognized, of being told, "You belong here. You always did."